John chapter 2 tonight. And we studied last week where he turned water into wine. The next account in this, and you'll notice that for the next few weeks we'll just be in the book of John. This is not a study of the book of John, but John records some parts of the earliest part of Jesus' ministry that the other gospel accounts don't record. And so it might seem for the next few weeks, well, we're studying the book of John. No, you'll see in the next few weeks we'll be looking at parallel accounts, not just one. But in these, it's just John that records these accounts. Tonight we're going to be talking where Jesus cleanses the temple. He did this on two occasions, once at the very beginning of his ministry, and then Matthew chapter 21 records the second time when he did it before the cross. So one at the beginning and one at the ending. And hopefully we'll see some things in here we may have overlooked in the past. Just see what Jesus does in this account. And I want you to think about this as we kind of set the stage for this. Remember, we talked at the very beginning, we really delved into history and culture. And I want you to just kind of set the stage for this. What did we study last week? I just said it. The marriage at Cana, where he turned water into wine. That was his first recorded miracle. Well, now he goes from that to what we're going to read tonight. That's right. And so, no doubt his fame had spread after that wonderful miracle that he did in Cana. You can just imagine how that got out very, very quickly. But the text opens in verse 13. We're in John chapter 2. Of Jesus coming now to Jerusalem. He's left Cana of Galilee and now he's going to Jerusalem. Now the Passover of the Jews was at hand and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Well, let's stop right there and think about this. We talked about Bible geography, those three things. Bible geography, we talked about culture, and we talked about history. If Cana is north of Jerusalem, and it is, then why does it say he went up to Jerusalem? Don't you usually say if you go south, you go down? There you go, the elevation. You literally went up to Jerusalem. And so that's why you'll read that when you talk about Jerusalem. Went up to Jerusalem. And so the text opens up with him coming to Jerusalem. And I've got a couple slides here I want to show you. This next one is just an artist's rendering. We don't know, obviously, what exactly it looked like. But this is an artist's rendering of what the temple and the temple grounds would have looked like. And this is not a lesson on the temple itself, but you've got the temple, which, before the temple was built, how did they worship? What did they have to carry around with them everywhere they went? A tabernacle. And so the temple is like a more grand tabernacle. It's set up. You still have the laver, you still have the holy place and the most holy place and all of these types of things. And so, but here it's a permanent building. But then outside of the most holy place and the holy place and the laver and all of that, you had a court around here. You had several courts. This was a huge building and just a huge edifice. So you had a court for the Gentiles. You had the court for women, the women's court. And so it would have made this whole campus probably just pale in comparison with just how large this was. And so this is probably kind of what it looked like. How's that for really something solid? Probably kind of what it looked like. But just give us an idea, and I want you to see also on here, here's the court that we're talking about on the outside and all of this. So now just put that picture in your mind because you're going to need that. We're going to try to set the scene of what this was like. Jerusalem was the focal point of the Jews' religion. As a matter of fact, it's the focal point of other religions as well. Battles have been fought over the centuries about Jerusalem. But turn with me to 1 Kings chapter 12. 1 Kings chapter 12. And I know we probably know the history on this pretty well, or some very well. Let's just set the stage. Remember, who wanted to build the temple? That was his life's goal, to build the temple. David did, but did he get to do it? Why not? He was a bloody man. He was a man of war. And so then who got to build it instead? Solomon did. Solomon's temple. And so in 1 Kings chapter 12, we read in verse somewhere. It's 1 Kings, somewhere in chapter 12. Let me just quote it. Then you can find it and show me where it is. This is a test. Not really. But it says, Solomon said to God, I have surely built thee a house to dwell in. I have surely built thee a house to dwell in. And so he finally got it done. And he, in his prayer to God, he makes this statement, I have finally built a house for you to dwell in. What would that have been like for the Jew, for the Jewish man? You've been following around, all of your ancestors have been following around this tabernacle everywhere it goes. And because of that, you had the Ark of the Covenant, and God would meet with them from above the mercy seat. But now you have a permanent place that symbolically God would dwell in. What do you think that would mean to the Jew of that day? Think it would be something? We'll put ourselves in that place. Imagine if we today, where does God dwell today, incidentally? Where does God dwell? That's right. He dwells in the church, in His people. But imagine if we were still living under that day and God was going to come down and He was going to meet with us from a certain location. You think it would be a big deal for us to have a building where God would meet with us? It would be huge, wouldn't it? It would be huge. And so it was the focal point. Jeroboam, in 1 Kings chapter 12. What is it? 1 Kings 8:13. 1 Kings 8:13. I think this is where I got 12. 1 Kings chapter 12, verse 27. Let's read this. Surely this one's right. If these people go up to offer sacrifices in the house of the Lord at Jerusalem, then the heart of this people will turn back to their Lord, Rehoboam, king of Judah, and they will kill me and go back to Rehoboam, king of Judah. So Jeroboam says, if these people go up to sacrifice to the house of the Lord, I've lost them. They're going to stop following me. If they get back to that temple, I've lost them. And so you remember what he did? He said, you don't have to go all the way there. He set up places and different places where you just don't go all the way to Jerusalem. Just do it in your own backyard and that'll be fine. That's right. Dan to Beersheba, they would have all of those. And because if he knew if these people got back to the temple, well, there was a danger that they wouldn't be following him. Does anybody know when the temple was destroyed and the walls of Jerusalem were destroyed? AD 70, and who did it? The Romans did. The Romans did. Incidentally, I think in the 300s, they tried to rebuild it, but then an earthquake took place and destroyed and so it hasn't been tried to been rebuilt since that day. So this is what it looks like today, as a matter of fact. That's all that's left is that wall. You'll hear the Wailing Wall. Yeah, the Wailing Wall. Yeah. But you know what Jewish people will still do today? I watched something about this on television not too long ago. They'll go up and they'll write prayers and they'll put them in all of the little crevices of that wall. And they'll put their prayers to God on there. And then, millions of people visit that wall a year. And so they can't, you got to clean them up because they're just little scraps. Be written on gum wrappers and everything else. And they'll stick in the wall. So they'll have to clean it up each night. And they put them in bags. And it's illegal to destroy those prayers. I can't remember exactly what they did with them. But they put them in a certain place because it's illegal. So there's all of these prayers. So this is still, even now, 2,000 years later, still their attitude towards this place. All right? It was important to the Jews of the day of Jesus. And rightly so. God ordained it. He instructed how it would be built. And He says, okay, I'll meet with you there. I'll meet with you there. All right? So that's just all something to get our minds thinking about this. But now let's read. Go back to the book of John, John chapter 2. And let's see what Jesus does when He comes up to Jerusalem for the Passover. Starting with verse 14, this is what He sees. And He found in the temple those who sold oxen and sheep and doves and the money changers doing business. When He had made a whip of cords, He drove them all out of the temple with the sheep and the oxen, and poured out the changers' money and overturned the tables. And He said to those who sold doves, "Take these things away. Do not make my Father's house a house of merchandise." Then His disciples remembered that it was written, "Zeal for your house has eaten me up." So the Jews answered and said to Him, "What sign do you show us, since you do these things?" Jesus answered and said, in other words, what gives you the right to do that? Jesus answered and said to them, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." Then the Jews said, "It has taken 46 years to build this temple. And will you raise it up in 3 days?" But He was speaking of the temple of His body. Therefore, when He had risen from the dead, His disciples remembered that He had said this to them, and they believed the Scripture and the word which Jesus had said. Incidentally, you remember they built the first temple, but when they got taken into captivity, it was destroyed. So they built a second temple to replace it, and it was destroyed in AD 70. And so the cleansing of the temple was the first public act where Jesus demonstrated His divine authority. So keep this in mind. Here's one that He does, his time where He comes out and begins to be a little bit more public, and He does this miracle at this marriage feast. So He goes from that, and now He demonstrates His divine authority in this way. Now, let's ask a question, and there's no way that we could actually know this. But the problem that the enemies of Jesus had with Jesus were not necessarily His miracles. Now you might say, well, yeah, Mark, but how many times did they get after Him because He performed a miracle on a Sabbath day? But let me ask you this question. Do you think that they would have had the problems with the miracles had He continued to do them if He hadn't done things like this? Or if He hadn't taught the things that He taught? You think they would be a little bit more tolerant of Jesus had He just, all right, you raised my uncle from the dead. We ran out of wine at the feast. You make wine. You do the things that we need. You get us out of a bind. Do you think they would have had as much problem with the miracles that they seem to have if He didn't teach and then do things like this to show His authority and to show how wrong they were? Right. So with that parallel, when do people have a problem with the church? Usually. If we were giving out food to the poor, if we took every dime that every member here has, and we took that and we spent every dime of it to help those in need, do you think anybody would have a problem with us? No. What's the problem that people have when it comes to true Bible teaching? When you teach something that's going to make me change, goes against what I want to believe, then we kick back a little bit. People kick back a little bit. And so Jesus goes from this miracle, and they were fine and dandy with that, but then He does this. Just give us the miracles with no authority, and they would have probably been just fine. Let's look at verses 14 through 16, because this is going to be the crux of it here. What does He find in the temple? He finds in the temple those who sold oxen and sheep and doves and money changers doing business. When He had made a whip of cords, He drove them all out of the temple with the sheep and the oxen, and poured out the changers' money and overturned the tables. And He said to those who sold doves, "Take these things away. Do not make my Father's house a house of merchandise." Animals would have been there in those courts that we talked about. And for what reason would those animals have been being sold there? Sacrificed. I read in one commentary, Brother Johnson said that at the Passover, about 200,000 Paschal lambs would have been there to be sold. Now that's just the sheep. That's not the oxen. That's not the doves. 200,000 would have been in those courts surrounding the temple to be sold. Well, you think about it. If you come all the way from Tennessee to Jerusalem to make sacrifice, I wouldn't want to carry a lamb with me the whole way. Well, I'll just buy one when I get there. What's the problem with this? Would it have been okay to just buy a sheep once I got there? Okay. That's a good point. Why weren't they sold at the stockyards? Well, where would you usually think you would go to buy a sheep? The temple? I need a good sheep today. I'm going to go up to Forest Hill and see what they got in the auditorium. And this is not anything compared to the temple. We're the temple, aren't we? We're the church. We're the building of God. But just kind of trying to put it like they did then. They're being sold there at the temple. And what was the temple to be used for? God would meet with them there. That's where they would worship. The court of the Gentiles, designed as a house of prayer for all nations, Mark tells us in Mark chapter 11, was converted into cattle stalls, filled with everything that comes with livestock. Now, imagine that. Are livestock nice and neat and clean and fragrant? The temple was a barn. That's a good way to put it. Because I want to just go as far as fragrant, and that helps. It smelled like a barn. And this is where it was. But the problem, not only with that, was this. There was high prices that was being charged for these animals. And they were just offering them an exorbitant amount for these animals. Keep that in mind. And then you had the money changers there. What was the money change? Why were the money changers there? Change the money into the Jewish currency. That's right. So what do you think the problem with that is? Again, that makes sense. You know, if I'm coming from another country and I've got to buy a sheep, that's right. And that's what would happen. These people were gouging when they were exchanging their money. They were giving them just pennies on the dollar. And so these people were getting robbed twice in the price of the animal and the currency, the money exchanging. Has anybody ever done some international travel very much? When you go into these other countries, they'll tell you, if you're going to exchange money, do not do it at the airport. And you know why? It's not a good exchange rate. Last time I was there, I think the exchange rate in India was like 52 or something at the airport, and it was like 68 in town at the bank. And so you see, oh yeah, we'll be glad to change your money for you. And what would they do? They would take that and go to the bank and get their money back. Kind of the same thing, but probably even worse for these. So here's the thing about this. This should have been the place where the people of God would come together in unity, sharing what they had. Instead, what were they doing to one another? They were robbing each other. Robbing each other. This is the place of prayer for people of all nations in the court of the Gentiles. But instead of welcoming them, having unity, treating your brother like a brother, sharing what you have. Instead, you were looking at your brother as a way, oh, here comes a pigeon. Here comes a guy I can take advantage of. And rip him off. You think that pleased the Lord? Look at Malachi chapter 3. if these two passages we're going to share are prophecies concerning this event, and I think they are, the Lord knew He was going to do this, obviously, before it ever happened. Malachi Chapter 3, verse 1. Behold, I send my messenger, and he will prepare the way before me. And the Lord whom you seek will suddenly come to the temple. Even the messenger of the covenant in whom you delight, behold, he is coming, says the Lord of hosts. He's coming. Now turn to Zechariah chapter 14. Chapter 14, verse 21. Yes, every pot in Jerusalem and Judah shall be holiness to the Lord of hosts. Everyone who sacrifices shall come and take them and cook in them. In that day there shall no longer be a Canaanite in the house of the Lord of hosts. That phrase, that last phrase I just read, literally reads like this. And in that day there shall not be a traitor in the house of Jehovah of hosts anymore. That sounds like what we're reading about in the book of John, doesn't it? Everything in the temple was to be used for holy purposes. Were they using it for holy purposes? That's right. They were gouging these people. So notice what our Lord does. He made a scourge of cords. Anybody here ever make a scourge of cords? I haven't either. But I have an idea it would take a little while. Does it sound like a raving madman? No. He's not just rushing out in harsh judgment right away without thinking about it. He's over there making that scourge of cords, thinking about what's going on and seeing what's going on and how He's going to stop all of this. And then what He does, let's go back to the book of John. I want you to see the order of this. I think this is a powerful, powerful, powerful lesson. So when He had made the whip of cords, watch this, He drove them all out of the temple. Who's the them there, do you think? Money changers, the sellers of the animals, drove them all out of the temple with the sheep and the oxen, and poured out the changers' money and overturned the temple. Here's my question. If you drive the people responsible for it out of the temple, haven't you done what you planned to accomplish? They were the ones that were sinning. Were the animals sinning? Was the money sinning? Were the tables sinning? So when you drive the people out, haven't you accomplished your goal? Why drive out the animals? Why turn over the money tables? Why go to all of that if just driving out the people would suffice? Right. He didn't want to give them a place to come back and set up shop again. If you've got sin in your life, do you just, all right, I'm going to take this, I'm going to put it right here, and I'm going to stop 90% of it, but I'll keep 10% of it in my reach. You think that would be a smart way to stop sin? Now listen, and I was trying to come up with something, and this is just an obvious one for me. If I were trying to stop drinking, if I were an alcoholic and I was trying to stop drinking, you think it would be smart for me to keep a bottle of whiskey in my cabinet? Yeah, I'll hide it from myself for a little. Or do you think it would be best to get rid of it completely? What does Jesus do? He turns all of these things over, drives out the animals, and doesn't want to give them a shop to set up again, to come back to. You know, He could drive them out, then He leaves. What would they do? They'd come right back in. So He's not only sending them out, He's putting them out of business, isn't He? And has anybody ever tried to drive animals? Any farmers in here? You ever tried to load a cow in the back of a trailer? They don't want to go. I'm going to tell you the secret with hogs. And I'm just picturing this in my mind of Jesus following these animals around with this scourge of cords, going after these animals and driving them. It's not what you think. The oxen say, "Oh, you want us to leave? You want to go out this door or that door?" It's going to be mayhem. That's the scene I'm trying to set for you. When you're loading a hog, you want to have a chute to where they cannot get turned around. I have been turned upside down by hogs that have turned around more times than I care to admit. They get turned around. I have to make that chute smaller and smaller and smaller. Because I didn't grow up on a farm. I had to learn as I go. It's not the best way. Once they get turned around, you're done. But let me tell you what an old Missouri man told me. And it worked like a charm. He said, when they get turned around, have a 5-gallon bucket with you and put it on its head. And you know what they'll do? They'll try to back out of that bucket and they'll back right up in the trailer. And I didn't know if he was messing with me or not when he told me that. And so I didn't tell him I was going to try it. But you know what? He was telling the truth. And it worked. But just imagine this scene. Animals scattering. And Jesus driving these people out, turning over these tables. Do you think he was upset with what he saw there? Well, you open the cage and just let them go, I guess. Verse 17. Then his disciples remembered that it was written, "Zeal for your house has eaten me up." We don't know exactly when the disciples remembered this. It's written in the aorist tense. It may have been sometime after this event they remembered this. Sometime after the event and before John wrote it. But they remembered that zeal for thine house has eaten me up. That word zeal means excitement of mind, fervor of spirit. It's the same word that is sometimes translated jealousy. Jealousy for thine house has eaten me up. Are you a jealous person? Let me ask you this. Is it always wrong to be jealous? Try not to be jealous, but you know there's some things that I have the right to be jealous over. I have my wife, which means what? She's nobody else's wife. And I would be jealous if somebody else tried to take her as their wife. Here you have the house of God being taken over by people who are ungodly and robbing the other children of God. Now, we know that this has an immediate impact on the priests. And here's the worst part of all of this. The leadership, the priesthood, the priests that worked in the temple every day, they all knew this was going on. Yet what did they do about it? Not a thing. It took Jesus coming in there that day to make it right. And it had an impact on them because what did they say? Verse 18, so the Jews answered and said to him, "What sign do you show us since you do these things?" All right, buddy, you better show us that you have authority to do this or you're going to be in trouble. And the only thing that's going to suffice here is that you show us a miracle. You show us a miracle and it might save your skin. Show us a sign. That's an interesting way to put that, isn't it? Show us a sign. You have the authority to do these things. It had an impact on the Jews that were there, didn't it? And then look what Jesus says. Jesus answered and said to him, verse 19, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." Well, what did they take that to mean? The literal temple that they were seeing there that would never fall because they were unconquerable, so they thought. But what was Jesus talking about? That's right, His body. Look at verse 21. He was speaking of the temple of His body. Therefore, verse 22, when He had risen from the dead, His disciples remembered that He had said this to them, and they believed the Scripture and the word which Jesus had said. Remember last week we talked about the disciples when they saw the water turn to wine. What did it say at the end? Do you remember what we talked about? Then the disciples believed in Him. Would you categorize their faith at the beginning as strong or still has a way to go? Still has a long ways to go, doesn't it? So these disciples, they grew as they followed Jesus. But here's the thing, their growth grew after Jesus died and was resurrected. When did all of this make sense to them? When the deed was done, when He got up from the dead, I can just see them sitting around. Do you remember that day at the temple? When Jesus said, destroy this temple and in 3 days I'll raise it up? Now we know. They didn't understand it, and how could they? Who would think that? Here's a point, and we're almost out of time, that we need to make. You read the life of Abraham, you read the life of David, you read the life of the disciples, the apostles of Jesus, and we look at them as people who had it all figured out all the time. They knew when they were going through this, what direction they were going in. They knew it was all going to make sense, and they knew. Is that how it was? No, it was. They're just like you and me. When we go through life, do you feel like you've always got it figured out? If you do, let's switch places, because I need to hear you. All of the people of God, listen to this, are just like you and me. The key is that our faith grows day by day, month by month, year by year. We become stronger, and our belief becomes more real, and our faith develops. Even these people who walked with Jesus, once He was raised from the dead, things started clicking with them. Let's close with verse 23 through 25. Now when He was in Jerusalem at the Passover during the feast, many believed in His name when they saw the signs which He did. So they asked for a sign right then. He said, I'll just tell you about a sign I'm going to do. They didn't understand it. But it tells us that while He was there, what did He do? He did miracles, didn't He? But Jesus did not commit Himself to them because He knew all men, and had no need that anyone should testify of man, for He knew what was in man. He knew then. Does He know now? That's right. He knew the hearts of men. And so quite a contrast from what we did last week. You're at this nice, beautiful, everybody's happy wedding feast. And now Jesus comes in and makes a scourge of cords, starts chasing those animals out the doors, turning over the tables, chasing out the people. For zeal, He had eaten him up. Oh yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of people. If you've got 200,000 lambs, you've got... All right. Read John chapter 3 for next week. John 3. It's familiar with you. Nicodemus